the newsagents.
And after weeks of will he, won't he, we learn today that the Chancellor won't, after all, be clapping down on non-doms. Tax-free income for millionaires, while millions face frozen tax allowances and council tax hive. How can he possibly claim that this is fair? He refuses to act, and I wonder why. Maybe that was the only policy that he can't get signed off by number 10 Downing Street.
That was the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves speaking about 18 months ago about Jeremy Hunt's adherence to tax perks for non-doms. And the comment she made at the end refers to Rishi Sunak and his wife, who, you'll remember famously, used to be a non-dom and got away with those tax perks. This week, non-doms and their status is in the headlines again, because he might be about to change his mind.
And remember, for Labour, this is the one solid pledge that hasn't changed. You know, the 28 billion on green taxes, well, that's sort of gone. But taxing non-doms has been one of the solid Labour commitments. And it looks like the Tories may, and as Emily says, may be about to steal their clothes in next week's budget. Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And a little later, we're going to be talking about what feels like this slight dislocation between what everyone's talking about on social media, the royal family, and the absence of key members of the royal family, and what everyone's talking about in the press, which is nothing to see here. Life goes on as usual. We're going to try and dissect what this is doing to us and the conversations that we're kind of having around those central figures, the royal family in public life.
But we're going to start with, I don't know how to describe it really. I suppose what you are seeing now is there are more kites flying from Her Majesty's Treasury than there are on top of Parliament Hill on a windy day, because there seem to be so many stories out there about, well, we might do this next week in the budget, and we might do that, and we might do something else. And what we're kind of leaning into is the idea that they're actually going to do something that they have absolutely flatly rejected for years, and that is to clamp down on non-doms, which very briefly means if you are a foreigner living in the UK, you will pay taxes on what you earn in the UK, but all your foreign income is free of tax. And that is anomalous. Go to anywhere else in the world and you will pay tax on what you earn, your global earnings.
It ties into our own sense of national history, because it actually goes back to the days of the British Empire. This idea that, you know, if you were forging ahead and finding new lands and discovering new spices, then somehow that was fine. And you didn't actually have to pay down your tax back to the revenue on the pioneering work that you were doing for the British Empire. And I suppose that's the spirit in which Labour have come to it, that it is a complete anachronism, that it doesn't fit into modern Britain or how we see ourselves, or really who deserves to have a tax loophole that is earning mostly the very, very rich extra money that is not going into public services here at home.
And I suppose the argument that's always been made by the Tories is, look, these are entrepreneurs. These are people who are investing in all sorts of things, in private equity, in, you know, venture capital, all the rest of it. And those are bringing jobs to the country. So if they've got a little bit that's kind of free and it keeps them in the UK, then let's keep it.
Yeah, they've had a sort of don't scare the horses attitude, haven't they?
Totally.
We want to have people that think of Britain as being a place for entrepreneurship and a good business environment.
But then you're left with the question, do the Tories do this because they desperately need to raise the money? Well, quite possibly. Or do they do this as just a blocking move? It's a game. They're playing a game of chess and it's a blocking move on the chessboard so that Labour can't do what it wants to do. And it's it's politics as a game. And I think that drives a lot of people absolutely nuts. But it's
back to your flags, your kites. Sorry, not flags, but kites. Getting a bit empire there. Are they putting this out?
I feel we should have Land and Hope and Glory playing underneath this episode.
Definitely. We'll get the proms going. But there's something, isn't there, in sort of the fact that we know all this a week out from the budget, are they seeing how it will land? Are they waiting for a response from Labour? Interestingly enough, we called up the Labour front bench today and we said, any thoughts on this? Answer came there, none. They are absolutely stum on this, presumably because they don't want to, I don't know, maybe give away their next thought on it in case that's nicked next Wednesday too. And so we are in this slightly odd place where all we know is that there is a lot of pressure on Jeremy Hunt to cut taxes in one form or another, to give him a rabbit, to pull out of his budget hat to say, look, we get it, we want to make people's lives easier, stick with us come the general election, we will be the party of tax cutting. And at the moment, he doesn't seem to see how he can do it because inflation has now come down, the cost of borrowing has now gone up, and any extra money he thought he had, even back in November when we were hearing about the autumn statement and the changes that happened then, don't seem to be there for him now.
So let's try and get further on this and understand it better, because no one is better than Ed Conway. No one. No one. I think he's the best. The economics editor at Sky, author as well, and just the most brilliant reader of the state of the British economy. And although he says, I'm just an economist, I don't know about the politics, he understands the politics bloody well too.
Hello, Ed.
Thanks very much for being with us. Is this normal, just how many ideas are out there, including this idea that the Conservatives are going to steal Labour's policy on non-doms?
Well, in some senses, it's very normal because they often have stolen Labour's ideas. And George Osborne very much enjoyed stealing Labour's ideas. And it's probably not coincidental that he's going on about this one as well, because he thinks it's a great, political strategy. It's also not unusual in that, like, recently, there's definitely been a lot more leaking than I can remember in previous years. Recently, I mean, the last 2-3 years or so. And previously, the Treasury, of all the institutions I deal with, and I deal with the Treasury a lot, I deal with the Bank of England, they're pretty leak resistant historically. And there's this, this old story about how Hugh Dalton, he was fired or had to resign as Chancellor when he leaked a bit of the budget years and years ago. Well, I mean, we are way beyond that these days. I think what's interesting about this particular cycle is it's the leaking and the briefing has kind of just been all over the place. Normally, you can sense a strategy. They're preparing people because there might be a rabbit in the hat and they want to get people excited. So on the day, and normally the way it works is in the run up to the budget, the Treasury and the Chancellor are saying, there's no money left. I'm really sorry to disappoint you, but we're not going to be able to do anything at all. And then you get up to the day and then out comes the rabbit. This time around, it was really weird because at the start of the year, and I remember this because I was there at Davos talking to the Chancellor about it. At the start of the year, they were kind of saying, well, yeah, we're going to cut taxes. We're going to cut taxes. It's going to be great. And then I think there was this kind of rearguard, this moment of realization from the Treasury officials that, hang on, what on earth are you doing? Because that means that when it comes to budget day, it's almost certainly going to be a massive disappointment if indeed we can't really cut taxes much. So I think now there's been a lot of trying to dampen down expectations. And then you get these little bits and pieces. So there's the vaping thing, there's non-doms. These are all potential policies. And the non-dom thing is interesting because it's quite, that could be big. It also goes against what the Tories have been saying for years and years, which is don't do this. It looks like it's a good idea, but actually it won't raise that much money and you'll drive off lots of investment. So if they're suddenly willing to consider it, then I guess it shows how nervous they are that Labour have got a potentially popular policy there.
So, Ed, is it actually a big money spinner, the non-dom thing? Because it seems that politically, if you're in favour of it, then you suddenly say it is. And if you're against it, then you suddenly say it's going to scare off business. What are the kind of numbers on that?
If you're in favour of it, you say that it could raise, up to £4 billion. And it's great. This is a very old, archaic thing. This goes back to the days of empire, the idea that people could say that they are not domiciled here, back to people working off in the empire, and so who saw their future home as being overseas. And the proponents say, listen, this brings in a lot of money into the UK. Yes, everyone feels a little bit mixed about these people. Some of them are shady, but the net benefit is great because they bring in a lot of money mostly to London, must be said. But we're a big financial centre. We're very outward looking. It's all positive. Don't get rid of it, they say, because actually you won't raise as much money. And the proponents say maybe you'll only raise a few £100 million in net terms, and actually the damage you cause could be even greater. Trying to work that out is really, really tricky. The Treasury has models and they have what they call ready reckoners on this stuff. And you can look at it and say, if you get rid of it, because it brings in kind of, roughly, three to £3.5 to £4 billion, you get rid of it and you potentially theoretically bring in that much money. But there's no kind of reckoning what it does to the popularity that the UK is viewed in. But I think that's a bit of a mugs game anyway, because there's so much else going on. The roller coaster we've had in the last few years, Brexit, what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. There's been a lot of things which are going to cause people to, have thoughts about whether they want to put their money into the UK or elsewhere.
Ed, you describe a situation where kind of in January, you're in Davos, the Chancellor's saying, whoopee-dee, I'm going to cut taxes. Here we are, the end of a month later, and whoa, nothing like a strike. Is that because actually how much fiscal headroom he's got keeps adjusting so fast that they just don't know where they are? I just can't quite picture the planning is that what they planned a month ago. Is it really so different to what they're planning now?
Can I at this point do a bit of a minor rant about
go
headroom?
on, we love a rant.
That bloody word. I hate that word headroom. It is so frustrating. And it's not just me, it's pretty much anyone who rationally looks at these numbers on a day-to-day basis. The whole point of headroom is an artifice. It's all because the government has a set of fiscal rules, and all headroom in this case means is we've got a bit of money until we break the rule. It's not like there's not some God-given piece of economic logic. It's not like the laws of thermodynamics or gravity. It is just, we've got a rule, we want to keep to the rule, and within that rule, we've got this much headroom. And the thing that frustrates me is that everyone treats it like a kind of faith, like an article of faith, like a religion, that we have. It's
like one of the 10 Commandments, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not. It's not a commandment. It so happens that a few years ago, the Conservative Party said, right, we want debt to be falling by the last year of the forecast horizon, which is in 5 years' time. So let's try and make it fall. It's not even saying we want debt to be lower in 5 years than it is today. It's not even that tough. It's saying, debt can go up crazy amounts, but as long as it's falling at the end of the 5-year horizon, then we're okay. And so I think that rule's a bit silly. I think the whole thing's a bit silly, if I'm absolutely honest with you. But the problem is, and to be honest with you, I for a long time have thought, do we actually need these fiscal rules? Does the market kind of care about them? I don't really think they do as much as politicians, think. And so they fetishize all this nonsense. The problem I have on that argument, okay, which I think is a pretty good argument, the problem I have on it is that then along came Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, and they did kind of say, well, who cares about all this stuff? And we all know what happened next. And so right now, but by the way, I don't think that was just because of the fiscal rules. It's because of what they did with the OBR. It's because of the fact that there was all this insinuation about spending lots of money. It's because of the fact everything was all over the place. Also, it's because of the fact that interest rates were going up at the same time. But the upshot of all of this is we obsess about these fiscal rules, which are kind of nonsensical. And everyone is arguing about whether there's an extra £13 billion or an extra £20 billion. But this stuff isn't a constraint. The government could spend much more if they wanted to. They could borrow much more. As long as they're sensible about it, you don't have to have a fiscal rule doing that. So sorry to rant, but there is this idea.
We love a rant.
We love it.
Ed, let me finish with one really unfair question, which is to put you in the Chancellor's shoes next week, holding your little briefcase up. I mean, what would make sense at this point in the economic and the electoral cycle, do you think, to do? I mean, how does he come away with... Because I guess what you're always trying to weigh up as a Chancellor is sort of the security and economic credibility plus the rabbit, right?
Yeah. I think... There's the politics. You guys know that more than I do. There's the economics as well, obviously. And you'll expect me, if I'm kind of being an economics person, to say, well, it's tough right now. There's not much money to spend. Spending is... these spending plans that the government has enshrined, they're really tight. They're probably going to have to spend a lot more money in 5 years' time. There's only a tiny bit of room for tax cuts. And anyway, the tax burden's rising. But to be honest with you, actually, my more interesting response to this is... right now, around the world, we are in the midst of a possible industrial revolution, a probable industrial revolution. There's massive stuff happening right now. And the US is going gangbusters on it. And what I'm talking about here is I'm talking about, the green energy transition.
Green energy,
it is such a big deal. It's such a big deal. And I'm sorry to bang on about it. I wrote this book about it, but it's such a big deal. And we in the UK are way behind everyone else on it. And we're way behind America. We are so far behind China. And we, the country which gave the world the Industrial Revolution in the first place, the dirty coal-based one, we have an opportunity to be doing far more with this exciting green one. But we're not. We're not investing much at all. And frankly, Labour have just obviously reversed on their £28 billion plan on it. And so I do think that there is a kind of a big bang drumming moment where you could say we could really be investing in the stuff that we're good at. And I just don't hear much of that coming from either of the main parties right now. So I quite like to hear a bit more on that.
Brilliant.
Great.
Ed, thank you so much.
Material World is Ed's book that he just nodded to very subtly there, but it is...
Oh, you're so kind. You're going to be on his publisher's Christmas card list.
No, I tell you, I'm not kind, but what he does is he goes into raw materials and commodities and explains basically how they drive the world's economy, how we do business, how we live. And so I think a little, a gentle plug is worth it.
Oh, that was a full-on plug, I say.
Yeah. Bye, Ed.
Bye.
Bye.
Just while we're on politics, and it follows up from what we were discussing on the podcast yesterday, and that's about the protests on the streets and whether enough is enough and they should continue or not. Rishi Sunak has really waded into this debate and actually sounding like an opposition politician who wants attention and who wants to be strident and attack the government. But it's actually come from Rishi Sunak when he says the country is sliding into mob rule. And he was talking to a Jewish charity which is concerned with keeping synagogues and kind of public buildings that are used by the Jewish community safe. And of course it was music to a lot of people's ears when he was saying this sort of stuff. But he's the Prime Minister. If you think the country's sliding into mob rule, question that follows up is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Also, I think it shows the difficulty of trying to speak specific things to specific constituencies. So you go on the radio and say that Lee Anderson was wrong. You don't explain why he was wrong, but you say he was wrong. But then you go to your Jewish charity where they are very concerned about the state of protest and you call that mob rule and you don't actually explain what that is either. But I think the problem with mob rule is it makes him sound like a George Galloway sort of figure, of which, more later. It's the kind of thing that you would say if you were standing on the outside of society, hurling verbal stones at the establishment. And it belies the fact that Rishi Sunak is A, the Prime Minister, B, of the party that's been in power for the last 14 years. And if you truly think that mob rule has taken over your streets and your country, then there's only really one question. Whose fault is that?
No, I think where Rishi Sunak is right is that it's perfectly possible that you can have peaceful protests on the streets and for people to still feel intimidated by those protests and not wanting to let your kids out and run around, showing that they're wearing a Star of David. They might have to hide that, or do they wear their skull cap, or is that kind of all out of bounds? So I think Rishi Sunak to talk about the fact that you might need to do more to protect communities and to protect our elected representatives, I say absolutely bang on. It's just the way he's characterised it that I think is deeply problematic. Is to say that we're descending into mob rule. No, we've got a particular issue at the moment with protest and the anger and the rage that people feel inside them over what is happening in Gaza. And that rage is felt on both sides of the community. And I think that, but just to kind of characterise it in sort of rather tabloid terms as mob rule comes to the streets of UK, is overdoing it.
Yes, because the point is, he's talked about growing consensus that mob rule is replacing democratic rule. I don't think there is a growing consensus that we no longer have a democracy. Is there? I mean, we can point to places that no longer have a democracy. Why would you do that? Why would you say that?
There are challenges, undoubtedly. But the kind of portrayal of Rishi Sunak as somehow being outside of government and not responsible for this and just an onlooker. There's a wonderful story of Thatcher when she was Prime Minister. The Deputy Chief Whip then was a guy called Tristan Garrell-Jones, absolutely fantastic figure, used to chain smoke through lunch and, would literally have a fork in one hand, a cigarette in the other. And he told this great story of going up to Thatcher's flat and she and Dennis are watching TV and they're listening to the news and they're saying, can you believe what the government has done? there she was in number 10, railing and throwing things at the television because she thought this was nothing to do. What are they doing, these ministers? And they were her ministers.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what we need to see is whether he was using that speech as a platform to talk to a very specific community, Jewish community, who, many of whom are feeling quite intimidated by the protests right now, or whether he actually intends to push the force of the law in the direction that his own Home Secretary was suggesting it goes in yesterday. We're going to gently wade in to territory that we haven't touched very much so far recently, and that is the question mark maybe, over what has happened to our senior royals. When King Charles got his diagnosis, we actually stayed away, pretty much. We didn't touch it. We assumed that he'd been as transparent as he wanted to be, and we left the rest to the royal family. When Kate went into hospital, we kind of didn't touch that either. But over the last 72 hours, something slightly odd has happened, and that is that we have felt their absence as a thing, a much more tangible thing. They have felt missing from our conversation because there is so much speculation of what is happening, of how they are, of how their health is and what's going on, and so few answers coming forward. And we thought we'd try and just talk about what that does to the national conversation and to the press and social media conversation as much as anything.
Yeah, I mean, what we're not going to do is try and speculate on what it is why Prince William had a personal issue, what that was, what Kate's surgery issues were, the degree of King Charles's cancer. I mean, we just don't know anything, and we're not going to try and speculate on it. And, it's amazing how many people have come up to me and go, well, you're a journalist, you must know what's going on. Yeah. No, I don't. We don't. I mean, if other journalists knew, they would broadcast it, they would publish it.
And we have to say that when we speak to the kind of people that we're used to speaking to,
we're getting nothing back.
They're quite tight-lipped.
Yeah.
So either no one knows anything, or else there is a very close circuit of people who are deciding to be entirely discreet about this. But
and that also raises the question of the right to know. What right do we have to know about Prince William? I saw a thing in there on the Daily Mail website last night, which said it talked about how the Kents, Princess Michael of Kent and Prince Michael of Kent, had done their duty and turned up at this memorial service for Prince William's godfather, even though their son-in-law had just died. It's a shame that Prince William couldn't put duty first as well. And I thought, what an appalling thing to write when you have no idea what the personal reasons were for Prince William not being at the memorial service. We understand today that he has resumed his princely duties and has been visiting Holocaust survivors. So, he was away for one thing. I don't know what our right to know is in that circumstance, but I do see the problem. The problem is that we're getting bits of information occasionally, but not that much. And so sometimes, the king was congratulated for his openness of talking about enlarged prostate. Whereas when Kate went into hospital at exactly the same time, we were told this is an entirely private matter and that we won't be making any comment on it. And you think, well, hang on, one side of you is telling us and thinking it's a good thing to be disclosing this information. Yet another part of the royal family is saying, lay off, back off, nothing to do with you.
Yeah, what was that quote that the Queen used, which was about the importance of being seen? And I suppose I'd be somebody who says, I don't really follow daily royal life in a very specific way. It's a sort of background soundtrack to, they've done this, he's been there, she said that, they've sort of worn that, and all the rest of it. You're aware of it without ever focusing on it. But I think what's happened now is it's been withdrawn without a full enough explanation for people to kind of go away and think about something else. And so they are fitting in the narrative that they think suits. I mean, some of them are sort of gentle and quite humorous and quite funny, and some of them are downright, sort of horrible, quite frankly. And I suppose it does go back to that whole question of where the royal family can draw the line. And this dreadful word, actually, transparency, because, we kind of say you should be transparent about this. And then we shut them down if they talk about, I don't know, if we don't like an intervention from Prince William on, Gaza or, the Middle East crisis. And then we turn around and say, well, if King Charles has done that, why hasn't, Kensington Palace done that? And so we end up slightly sort of playing off what we do know and what we don't know, which I think is a rather sort of insolicitous place to be, actually.
I was really struck after the Queen died and there was the transition to King Charles. It was as seamless as it could be. There was no political turbulence. There was no, a lot of people had anticipated that there might be this kind of period of instability where people were questioning the prince rising to become king after his background and what happened with Princess Di and his marriage to Camilla. And it was absolutely seamless. But here we are, however many months on, 18 months on, from the Queen's death, from Charles ascending to the throne, and you looked at the pictures at Windsor Castle for the memorial service to the former King of Greece, and the royal family is being led by Prince Andrew, who's no longer a serving royal following an interview he gave to somebody or other. And therefore, he'd been cast into outer darkness, but he was leading the royal family into Windsor Chapel. And you think, wow, now that's a very odd place to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's all come around, hasn't it? Because we heard that phrase, I guess, shortly after that interview, and in the sort of the latter days of the Queen and the beginning of King Charles's reign, which was about a slimmed down monarchy. And the idea was that you got rid of the sort of, the chaff a little bit. You got rid of the people that weren't central. The hangers-on, the people that, that got the public angry about taxpayer money. And you said, we don't actually need that. And we don't need sort of, odd people doing weird things with, American billionaires. We want to have a very slimmed down version of the monarchy. But actually, if you look at where we are now, King Charles is absent, and we know why, his cancer diagnosis and treatment. We know Kate Middleton's absent, and we understand that she's having had abdominal surgery. We now know that Prince William had to be absent, but we don't have a reason for that. We know that Harry is absent because he isn't really in the royal family anymore. We know that Andrew is absent because of, reasons as previously discussed. So suddenly slimmed down to something that is really looking emaciated. And out of this, it is the Queen Camilla, who has to kind of hold all the events together. She is now centre stage, into a family of which she's only really been a part of formally in the last decade or so.
And the interesting thing is that, from everything I know about Queen Camilla, is that she's a rather private person, that she enjoys being in the countryside and not dealing with all this royal flummery that has to go on. And yet she's absolutely risen to the task brilliantly. But you do realise that she's the one that's keeping the show on the road at the moment. And I think the point you made earlier about we like the royal family, unless you're an arch royalist and you follow the court circulars of who's going to be where and opening what, it's background music for us. It's not in the car really noisy and giving us earache. We just like to know that they are there and that it's functioning. And it doesn't feel like that right now. It doesn't feel like things are going smoothly or properly. And
I would say, I'd go one further than that. I'd say their absence is now intruding on the conversation in a way that their presence doesn't.
And yet they have got a communications technique which seems to me to belong to a different era. And I don't know what the answer is, but they are communicating like we can make a statement whenever we like, and we can go silent for as long as we like, and we don't have to tell you a bloody thing in between. I just think that kind of in social media age, where millions and millions of people are setting fires and speculating with these fires, on what it is and what's the matter and what's wrong, that ends up damaging the royal family, because there is a vacuum that has been created and nothing is filling it apart from this kind of wild speculation.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I don't know what else they could do.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
You're not going to respond to gossip. You're not going to respond to everyone's tweets. You're not going to respond to the memes joking about, who might have gone off to do what. So you have to be silent. And in a way, what they've done now, I mean, it's literally in the last hour that they've published the photos of Prince William visiting Holocaust survivors, and he's very deliberately talked about Catherine and I, bringing her verbally into the conversation because she's physically absent. You know, we actually haven't seen her since Christmas Day publicly.
Look, the Queen, after the fire at Windsor Castle, talked about the annus horribilis.
Yeah.
I mean, this is turning into a bit of a horribilis at the moment.
Yeah, great.
I mean, it is a bit kind of, it's been one thing after the other, and how to communicate while still respecting the privacy. And I think that, you know, Kate Middleton is entitled to that privacy. King Charles is entitled to that privacy. But they are also public figures, and squaring that circle is turning out to be incredibly difficult for the palace.
Yeah, we want our royals human, but not too human. Now, talking about unwarranted interventions, I don't know whether this is going to be help or hindrance to George Galloway, who is...
Are you going to vote for him?
One of the many fighting the Rochdale by-election tomorrow, or today rather. But Nick Griffin, the former leader of
the British
BNP,
National Party.
The British National Party, who calls himself a traditionalist and a British patriot and a truth teller, has just backed George Galloway. He isn't just right on keeping us out of Zionist wars, he also understands the working class position, the position of working class white Brits on immigration, and condemns grooming gangs targeting young English girls as well as the IDF killing Palestinian babies. So his endorsement of George Galloway is picking Rochdale issues, international issues, and things that he thinks, you know, many people in the country care very strongly about, i.e. immigration. I don't know whether you actually want to have, as a left-wing firebrand, the right-wing BNP leader helping you out here.
They are very odd political bedfellows, and I don't want to think of them particularly as being in bed together.
They're not really that odd in a way, are they? I mean, it's the horseshoe.
I mean, it's the...
You sort of go to the top and you
If
go
you-
all the way around and you get to the same place.
Yes. I think, isn't that a circle rather than a horseshoe? Because if you go round to the other end of the horseshoe, you fall off. Horseshoe is not circular. It hasn't
But
got
it's
a
the
top.
idea that you're the extreme ends, and then when you bend them together into a horseshoe.
Oh, no.
I'm thinking of a ferrier and what you actually do in a forge, which is you take the long piece of iron, you bend it up to the top, and you get two people who are very, very close to each other at the end.
You see, I didn't know you were an ironmonger. A smithy.
Ferrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smithy Maitlis.
Yep.
We'll be back tomorrow with the Rochdale results. But also there's a special episode of Newsagents USA with some momentous things that happened in Washington over the past 24 hours. And we're also going there, which is very exciting. We're on a plane to DC.
You sound a bit Alan Partridge then.
Oh, do I?
A tiny bit,
Okay,
yeah, a little bit.
wind it down.
We're also going there. Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
We
well,
hope to be going there.
So we are going to be
it's an
going to
exciting time to be
Washington, and I'm sounding really bored by the whole idea. If you fancy listening, do, but otherwise, just get on with your life.
No, come and join us. Come and join us. Bye for
Bye-bye.
now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.